The rejection. The grand palace stood high on the alien planet, its spires glistening under the twin suns that bathed it in an otherworldly glow. Inside, in the most luxurious chamber, the air was thick with tension. The alien princess, with her silver hair cascading down her back and piercing violet eyes, sat on her jeweled throne, unbothered by the endless parade of suitors who had come from across the galaxy. Her reputation preceded her, Princess Saphira, the most powerful and beautiful of her kind, had long been sought after by the finest of alien royalty. Yet, time and time again, she rejected them all. The galaxy's most prominent leaders, warriors, and even the richest of merchants bowed at her feet, offering everything from kingdoms to treasure, hoping to win her heart. But Saphira had no interest in their offers. To her, they were all the same, just powerful beings who wanted to control her, to add her to their collection, like some priceless artifact. And she wasn't about to let that happen. Today was no different. One by one, the suitors entered the throne room, each presenting themselves with grand gestures, displaying their wealth, power, and status. The first, a towering alien with 4 arms and shimmering golden skin, stepped forward. His deep voice rumbled as he declared, "I offer you an alliance with the strongest army in the galaxy. Together, we will conquer new worlds and bring prosperity to your kingdom." He bowed deeply, expecting her to be impressed. Saphira's expression remained icy. She stared at him, her violet eyes not betraying a single flicker of interest. "You speak of conquest. But what is conquest to a woman who has no desire to rule through force?" She replied, her voice calm but filled with contempt. "You may leave now." The alien's eyes widened, and he hesitated before walking away, his pride wounded but his resolve unbroken. The next suitor was no different. A wealthy merchant, his robes dripping with jewels and precious stones, promised Saphira all the riches of the known universe. "There is nothing you cannot have, my princess. With my wealth, you will want for nothing," he said, his voice sweet and persuasive. Saphira looked him over, barely hiding her disdain. "And what would I do with riches when I have no desire for possessions?" She leaned back in her throne, her gaze cold and unyielding. "Your wealth is meaningless to me. Leave." The merchant, clearly upset but too polite to argue, bowed his head and withdrew, leaving the room in silence. Suitor after suitor came and went, each one more eager than the last, each one offering something different, hoping to be the one who could win her heart. But every time, Saphira's response was the same. No, the princess did not care for power or wealth, and she had no need for companionship. She was content in her solitude, ruling her people with strength and grace, but never seeking the touch of another. As the day wore on, and the suitors continued to arrive, Saphira's mind began to wander. She stood up from her throne and walked toward the grand balcony that overlooked the vast alien landscape. The twin suns were beginning to set, casting a fiery orange and pink glow across the sky. It was beautiful, serene. She inhaled deeply, closing her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the universe on her shoulders. Despite the riches and power at her disposal, she felt empty, alone. She had never wanted any of them, the suitors, the alliances, the power struggles. All she had ever wanted was freedom. But even freedom came at a price. The more suitors she rejected, the more rumors spread about her. Whispers of her cold heart, her unwillingness to connect with others, her pride. Some said she was a woman too powerful for any man to claim, while others suggested that she was simply afraid of giving up control. But none of them knew the truth. None of them knew that she had been betrayed once, long ago. That she had loved once, with all her heart, only to be abandoned. Since then, she had closed herself off, determined never to let anyone get too close again. No one would break her heart again. No one. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Your Highness, there is one more suitor," a guard said respectfully. Saphira's eyes narrowed. "Who?" she asked, her voice cold. "A human," the guard replied. a hint of confusion in his tone. He insists on speaking to you. Zafira froze. A human. She had heard stories, of course. Humans were known for their resilience, their strength, and their unyielding spirit. But she had always thought of them as simple, primitive beings, nothing more than pests in the grand scheme of the galaxy. What could one human possibly offer her that all the others had not? The idea of a human daring to approach her intrigued her, if only for the absurdity of it. She looked down at the guard, her voice soft yet commanding. Let him in. As the guard turned to leave, Zafira's heart began to race. She would handle this human the same way she had handled all the others. She would show him the same coldness, the same indifference. But as the doors of the throne room opened, revealing the human standing tall and confident in the doorway, something shifted within her. For the first time in years, a spark of curiosity flickered in her chest. Could this human be different? Or was he just another suitor with empty promises? Her gaze met his, and in that moment, she knew something had changed. But she would not show it. Not yet. Approach, she commanded, her voice steady, but beneath it lay something she could not quite place. The human stepped forward, a calm smile on his face, as if he were not intimidated by the alien princess who had rejected everyone else before him. This would be interesting. The arrival of the human. The throne room doors closed behind the human with a soft thud, echoing through the vast chamber. Princess Zafira remained seated on her throne, her back straight, her hands resting on the arms of her seat. She studied the man before her carefully, her violet eyes narrowing as she assessed him. He was unlike any of the suitors she had encountered before. His clothes were simple, nothing extravagant, just a faded shirt and sturdy pants, as though he had traveled far with no concern for appearance. His hair was messy, his face rugged, but his eyes were what intrigued her the most. They were filled with something she hadn't seen in any of the other suitors. Calm, steady confidence. There was no arrogance or fear in his gaze, just the certainty of someone who knew exactly who he was and what he wanted. Zafira couldn't quite understand it. Why didn't he look intimidated? She was the ruler of this planet, the most powerful being in this entire palace, and yet this human, standing before her, was unfazed. "Who are you?" Zafira asked, her voice as cold as ever, but with an edge she couldn't fully hide. "I'm John," the human said simply, his voice steady. He took another step closer, not bowing like the others had, not groveling for her approval. It was as though he were speaking to someone on his level, and Zafira found that both frustrating and oddly refreshing. John paused before her, studying her as well. He wasn't here for wealth or power. He wasn't here to impress her with empty gestures or grand promises. In fact, he seemed completely uninterested in her throne, her wealth, or the vast empire at her command. "What brings you here?" Zafira asked again, trying to maintain her composure. This wasn't how she had planned this meeting. No, this human was supposed to be like the rest. Another arrogant, shallow creature who would eventually be rejected. "I'm here because I was told to speak with you," John replied simply, his tone carrying an undercurrent of challenge. "I was told you have a reputation for rejecting every suitor who comes your way, but no one ever said why. So I came to see if I could figure it out myself." Zafira raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement crossing her face. "You think you can just stroll in here, ask questions, and I'll answer them? You, a human, are no different from the rest." John smiled, an expression that didn't show any signs of fear or hesitation. "Maybe not, but I think I'm different in other ways. I'm not here for power. I'm not here for your riches. I'm here because I think you deserve someone who can see past the facade. Someone who doesn't care about what you have, but who you really are underneath." The princess stared at him, her heart beginning to pound in a way she hadn't expected. How dare he speak to her in such a manner? How dare he suggest she was hiding something? She had built her life on strength, independence, and control. She was above them all. And yet, This human's words seemed to strike a chord she wasn't ready to face. "What do you think you know about me?" Zafira's voice was sharp, her anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't know anything about me. You think you can just waltz in here and uncover my facade like some commoner." John's eyes softened, and for the first time since he had entered, his expression became serious. "No, I don't think I know everything about you, but I know what it's like to be misunderstood, to be judged by others before they really see you. I don't need to be royalty or a powerful warrior to understand that much." The princess blinked, taken aback by his words. This wasn't the kind of response she was used to. He wasn't begging for her favor, and he wasn't afraid of her temper. Instead, he was calm, collected, almost too calm. And it was starting to unsettle her. "I don't need your pity," she spat, though even as the words left her mouth, she felt a strange emptiness behind them. John didn't flinch. "It's not pity," he replied. "It's understanding. There's more to you than what you've shown, and I think you know it. Maybe you've been alone so long that you've convinced yourself you're fine with it. But deep down, you want someone who sees you for who you really are." Her chest tightened at his words, and she quickly stood, her regal presence filling the room. "I don't need anyone. I rule this empire alone, and that's how it will stay. I have no need for your empty words." John didn't move, didn't flinch, and didn't argue. He simply gave her a knowing look. "Maybe not, but there's one thing you've forgotten." "And what's that?" Zafira demanded, her voice thick with defiance. "That even the strongest walls can crumble if you let the right person in." The words hit her like a blow, and for a split second, Zafira's anger faltered. It wasn't the words themselves, but the truth they held. Could it be that the walls she had so carefully built around her heart were not as strong as she thought? Zafira quickly shook off the thought, pushing it away before it could take root. "You are mistaken. You may leave now. I have no interest in whatever it is you think you know." John simply nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips as he turned to leave. "I'll be around," he said quietly, his voice lingering in the air as he exited the room. For a moment, Zafira stood there, staring at the door where the human had just left. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, frustration, confusion, anger, and a strange, unsettling curiosity she couldn't quite shake. What was it about this human that made her feel this way, and why did it bother her so much? She stared out of the balcony once again, the two suns now dipping below the horizon. A chill crept up her spine, not from the cold, but from the realization that, despite all her power and control, something about this human had gotten under her skin. Her rejection of him had been easy, so easy, but now she wasn't so sure. The challenge. Days passed since John, the human, had left the throne room, and Zafira could not rid herself of the thoughts he had sparked. She had dismissed him, just another suitor with grand ideas and no understanding of who she truly was. But deep down, something told her she hadn't seen the last of him. Sure enough, John reappeared, this time with a bold request. "I've heard you've rejected every suitor, no matter how powerful," he said, his voice calm and confident as he approached her throne once again. "I think it's time I prove myself to you." Zafira looked at him with a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you suggesting, human?" John smiled, that same steady confidence in his eyes. "A challenge. You've tested every suitor, every alien, to prove their worth. Why not test me? I'll show you that I can meet any challenge you throw at me. If I fail, I'll leave and never come back. But if I succeed, you'll owe me one thing." Zafira narrowed her eyes, her curiosity growing despite herself. No one had ever dared make such an offer before. "What could you possibly want from me, human?" John's smile softened, a glimmer of something more in his eyes. "Your respect. That's all I ask for." The idea of a challenge intrigued her. She had never met anyone so bold, someone who was willing to put everything on the line to earn her favor. The other suitors had all come with their offerings, their promises of power, wealth, or alliances. But this human was different. He wasn't trying to buy her with material things. He wanted something far more valuable: her respect. She studied him for a moment, weighing her options. Her pride told her to dismiss him, to reject his challenge and remind him of his place. But something else, something deeper, whispered that this could be an opportunity. A chance to test not just his strength or skill, but his character. "I accept your challenge," Saphira said, her voice steady and commanding. "But understand this: failure will not be tolerated. You will prove your worth, or you will leave my presence forever." John nodded without hesitation. "Understood. What's the first test?" Saphira stood from her throne, her regal presence filling the room as she walked toward a large stone door at the back of the chamber. With a simple gesture, she opened it, revealing a vast training ground beyond, a place where only the strongest warriors in her kingdom were allowed to spar. The human's eyes flickered with curiosity, but he didn't speak, waiting for her next move. Saphira's voice echoed through the space. "Your first test will be physical. You'll face my best warrior in hand-to-hand combat. If you can defeat him, I'll know that you are more than just a man of words." John's face didn't show fear, but instead a quiet resolve. He looked up at the towering figure of the alien warrior, a creature with 6 arms, massive in size, and covered in a tough, armor-like exoskeleton. Saphira's champion stood there, grinning, eager to crush the human in front of him. "Do you think you have a chance?" The warrior sneered, his voice deep and gravelly. John didn't respond immediately, his eyes locked on the warrior's every movement. He didn't show any sign of intimidation. This was a test, not just of physical strength, but of mental fortitude. Saphira's voice rang out again. "Begin." The warrior lunged forward with surprising speed, his 6 arms coming at John from every direction. But the human dodged with skill that was almost unexpected. He sidestepped one arm, ducked under another, and countered with a swift kick to the warrior's knee, causing the giant alien to stumble slightly. The warrior roared in anger and swung a heavy fist, but John was already in motion, moving with fluid grace as he avoided the blow. It was clear he had experience in combat, though he wasn't the same size or strength as his opponent. But what he lacked in sheer muscle, he made up for in agility and strategy. Saphira watched closely, intrigued by the human's ability to hold his ground. Her warriors were the best of the best, and none had ever failed to defeat any challenger. But this human, he was different. His movements were precise, calculated, as if he had fought in countless battles before. The warrior grew increasingly frustrated, his movements becoming wild and desperate. John, however, remained calm, his breathing steady as he continued to evade each attack with ease. Finally, after a quick exchange of blows, John managed to land a series of precise strikes to the warrior's pressure points. The alien warrior staggered, his strength faltering as he collapsed to the ground, groaning in defeat. John stood over him, breathing heavily but unharmed. "Is that enough for you?" he asked, his voice steady, though his muscles burned from the effort. Saphira's eyes widened. This was unexpected. The human had defeated her champion with nothing but skill, not brute strength. He had shown that he was more than capable of handling physical challenges. The warrior on the ground cursed under his breath, but Saphira merely gestured for him to rise. "You have passed the first test," she said, her voice neutral, though there was a hint of respect hidden beneath her words. "But there is more to come." John didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply nodded, ready for whatever came next. His challenge wasn't over, and he knew it. This was just the beginning. Saphira studied him for a moment longer. She had thought he would be like the others, overconfident, arrogant, or weak. But this human, he was different. His determination was undeniable, and that was something she couldn't ignore. As John stood tall, unwavering, the princess couldn't help but feel a strange admiration for him, a feeling she hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to handle. The challenge was far from over, but Saphira knew one thing for certain: This human was proving himself worthy, and the more he proved, the more she found herself intrigued by him. Unwanted feelings. Zafira stood in the grand hall, watching as John prepared for the second challenge. He had passed the first one with remarkable skill, but this next test would push him to his limits. She couldn't deny that his tenacity and ability to adapt impressed her. No human had ever shown such resilience, especially not in the face of her kingdom's fiercest warriors. The air was thick with tension as she paced across the floor, her mind torn between admiration and frustration. She had never been one to be affected by others. She ruled alone, kept her emotions in check, and rejected any form of vulnerability. Yet the more time she spent with John, the more her resolve seemed to crumble. "Are you ready?" Zafira's voice broke through the silence, firm and steady, as she watched John stretch, preparing himself for the next test. John turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with that same unshakable calm. "I've been ready since the first challenge," he replied with a hint of a smile. Zafira felt an involuntary flutter in her chest at his words, and she quickly masked it with a cold, indifferent stare. "Focus," she reminded herself. "This is just another test. This is not personal." The second challenge was a test of intellect and strategy. Zafira had chosen to take him into the heart of her kingdom's labyrinthine maze, an ancient structure filled with traps, puzzles, and obstacles designed to test the minds of those who dared to enter. Only the most clever and patient could navigate its twists and turns and emerge victorious. "You will have to solve the puzzles and find the exit within 1 hour," she instructed, her voice carrying a sense of finality. "Fail, and you will be trapped forever." John nodded, unfazed. No pressure then. Zafira couldn't help but feel a strange twinge in her chest. The human's attitude was both irritating and fascinating. He never seemed nervous, never seemed to fear failure. Where others had quaked in their boots, John simply moved forward, confident in his abilities. They entered the maze, and Zafira observed from above, hidden in a control room where she could monitor his progress. The walls of the maze shifted and moved, and the air around him grew thick with tension. But John didn't hesitate. He studied the surroundings carefully, noting the subtle shifts in the floor and the faint hum of hidden mechanisms. He solved each puzzle with ease, his mind sharp and focused as he maneuvered through the maze. But Zafira was starting to notice something else, something she hadn't anticipated. As she watched him move through the labyrinth, a growing feeling began to well up inside her, something uncomfortable and foreign. It was an odd mixture of frustration and admiration. She found herself watching his every move with an intensity she couldn't explain, her gaze lingering longer than it should have. She shook her head, trying to banish the thought. This was ridiculous. This was just another challenge. She was the princess, the ruler of this kingdom, and she could not afford to let any emotions get in the way. She had built her life on strength and control. She didn't need anyone else, especially not a human. But despite her best efforts, she couldn't look away. John's every move seemed calculated, his focus unwavering. He was clever, strong, and persistent. And with each passing minute, he was proving her wrong. Maybe it wasn't just his strength she admired. Maybe it was his resilience, his ability to keep going despite the odds, despite the doubts that were surely beginning to cloud her own mind. John finally reached the center of the maze, where the final puzzle awaited him. Zafira, watching from above, felt a pang of anticipation. Would he succeed? With only moments to spare, John solved the final puzzle, unlocking the door to the exit and stepping out of the maze. "Well done," Zafira said, her voice betraying none of the internal turmoil she felt. She stepped forward, her eyes locking with his. "You passed the second challenge, but it's not over yet." John's smile was small but knowing. "I figured as much." As he walked toward her, something in Zafira's chest tightened. There was a pull she couldn't ignore, a feeling that she hadn't expected, but that had been growing stronger with each passing moment. "You've done well so far," she said, her voice low, almost softer than she intended. She quickly cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. But there's still more to prove. John's eyes softened, and for the first time, Sapphira saw a flicker of something that she couldn't quite place. It wasn't arrogance or pride. It was something else entirely. "I'm not here to prove myself to you, princess," he said quietly. "I'm here to show you that you're more than just your crown. You're more than just a ruler. You're a person." Sapphira felt a shock of heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with such honesty, such vulnerability. She was the ruler. She was the one who controlled everything. No one dared speak to her this way. She quickly turned away, her back to him, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and something else. "Why does this human make me feel this way?" She gripped the edge of the stone wall, forcing herself to calm down. "I don't need your sympathy, human," she said, her voice harsh, though it wavered slightly. John didn't respond right away. He simply stepped closer, his presence calm and unwavering. "I'm not offering sympathy. I'm offering understanding. You're not alone in this, princess." Sapphira spun around, her heart pounding in her chest. "Don't presume to know anything about me," she snapped, her voice rising in frustration. "You know nothing about me." John met her gaze steadily, his voice softer now, but no less firm. "Maybe not, but I know what it's like to be misunderstood. And I know what it's like to build walls to protect yourself." Her breath caught in her throat. She had always prided herself on being untouchable, unbreakable. But this human was pushing at the edges of her carefully constructed walls, and for the first time, she was unsure if she wanted to keep them intact. "I don't need anyone," Sapphira said, her voice shaky, though she tried to make it sound commanding. John stood there, silent, his gaze unwavering. The tension between them thickened, and in that moment, Sapphira realized that something was shifting inside her. She had always believed that strength came from independence, from solitude. But maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. The truth was, she didn't know what she needed anymore. And that scared her more than anything else. As John turned to leave, Sapphira stood frozen, her mind racing with emotions she couldn't name. There was something in him that was slowly unraveling everything she thought she knew about herself, and she hated that she was beginning to care. The following days were a blur for Princess Sapphira. The intense feelings that John had stirred in her refused to fade, no matter how hard she tried to focus on her duties, her kingdom, and the challenges ahead. Each time she saw him, something inside her shifted. The walls she had spent years building began to feel weaker, and she was unsure whether to resist or to embrace the change. John had passed every challenge she threw at him with unwavering confidence, but it wasn't just his abilities that captivated her. It was the way he spoke to her, the way he treated her, not as a ruler, not as a princess, but as a person. It was something she had never experienced before, and it terrified her. She stood in her private chamber, staring out over the sprawling city that lay beneath her palace. The twin suns were setting, casting a soft golden hue over the horizon. It was a peaceful sight, yet her mind was anything but at peace. "Why does he affect me like this?" she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. "Why can't I just push him away like I've done with everyone else?" Her thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. She didn't need to look to know who it was. The guards had made it clear that John was waiting for her. With a heavy sigh, Sapphira turned and opened the door. There he stood, looking as calm and confident as ever, a slight smile on his lips. But his eyes held something deeper, something she wasn't sure she could handle. "I know you're busy," John said softly, "but I wanted to speak with you. I think we need to talk." Sapphira crossed her arms, trying to appear as aloof as possible, but she couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled in her chest. "What is it this time, human?" she asked, her voice colder than she intended. John stepped forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I think you know what I want to talk about," he said quietly. It's not the challenges or the tests. It's us. Saphira's breath caught in her throat, and for the first time since they had met, she felt a wave of uncertainty. "What do you mean, us?" she asked, trying to keep the edge in her voice. "There is no us, John. You're just another suitor, and I'm the princess. You've proven yourself, but that's all there is to it." John's smile faded slightly, and he took another step closer. "Is that really all there is? Because I don't think it is. I've spent enough time with you to know that you're not just a princess. You're more than that. But you've built these walls, and I can't get through to you if you don't let me." Saphira felt her heart race again, and she fought to keep her composure. "I don't need anyone to get through to me," she snapped, her words sharp. "I've lived my entire life alone. I rule alone. I make the decisions. I'm fine." John didn't back away. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity she couldn't look away from. "You don't have to be fine all the time, Saphira. It's okay to let someone in. You're not weak for wanting that. But you have to stop running away from it." The words hit her like a wave, and she took a step back, shaking her head. "Stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Stop trying to make me feel something I don't want to feel. You're not my problem. And I'm not yours. I don't need anyone." John's expression softened, and he stepped closer still, his voice low and gentle. "I'm not here to fix you, princess. I'm here because I want to be with you, if you'll let me." She wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't sure if she could let him in. But for the first time, she wondered if she even wanted to keep the walls up anymore. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Perhaps for the first time, she was ready to face what lay behind the walls she had built for so long. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. Saphira's heart pounded in her chest, her emotions swirling in a storm she couldn't control. She wanted to reject him, to push him away like she had done with everyone else. But something inside her, something she had been fighting for so long, wanted to reach out to him, wanted to let him in. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. "No," she said firmly, though her voice cracked slightly. "You don't understand. I can't be with you. I've spent my life building an empire, ruling this kingdom. I can't let anyone get close. Not even you." John's face darkened with understanding, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Saphira, you don't have to carry the weight of the world alone. You don't have to keep pushing everyone away to protect yourself." Tears pricked at the corners of Saphira's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "No, I won't break down. Not like this. Not for him. Please," she said, her voice strained. "Leave." For a moment, John didn't speak, his eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. Then, with a soft sigh, he slowly removed his hand from her shoulder. "I'll leave. But I'm not going anywhere. You know where to find me." And with that, he turned and walked away. Saphira stood there, frozen in place, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in around her. She had pushed him away, just as she had pushed everyone else in her life. But unlike the others, John had made her feel something real, something raw. And in doing so, he had cracked the foundation of her carefully constructed walls. The turning point. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions for Princess Saphira. John's words, his presence, his kindness, they lingered in her mind, refusing to let go. She had pushed him away, just as she had pushed everyone else in her life, but this time felt different. She couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the nagging feeling that maybe she had made the wrong choice. She tried to focus on her duties as the ruler, throwing herself into her responsibilities. She commanded the armies, made decisions for the prosperity of her kingdom, and ensured her people remained safe. But no matter how much she tried to distract herself, a part of her remained restless, distracted by the thoughts of the human who had come into her life like a storm, shaking everything she thought she knew. Zafira spent long hours alone in her chambers, staring out at the twin suns setting over the horizon. She could hear the quiet hum of the palace, but it only made her feel more isolated. She had always prided herself on being unshakable, invincible. She was the ruler, the one who controlled everything around her. Yet now, for the first time, she felt out of control. Why does this feel so hard? She thought, her heart heavy. Why can't I let him go? She had spent so many years building her walls, creating a life where no one could get close to her. She had told herself that it was for the good of her kingdom, that she needed to remain strong, untouchable. But the truth was, it was easier to shut people out than to face the vulnerability of letting someone in. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She knew who it was before he even spoke. "Princess," John's voice came from the other side. "Can we talk?" Zafira's heart skipped a beat. She had been expecting this moment, yet she wasn't prepared for it. She could feel her pulse quicken as she stood, walking toward the door. She hesitated, her hand resting on the handle, torn between letting him in and sending him away once again. In the end, she opened the door. John stood there, his expression earnest, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "I know you don't want to hear it," he said softly, "but I can't leave things the way they are." Zafira stood in the doorway, her heart pounding. "I told you to leave," she said, though the words felt hollow now. "I don't need anyone." John didn't step back. "I'm not leaving, Zafira. Not because I think you need me, but because I believe you're stronger than you realize. I believe that you don't have to face everything alone." Zafira swallowed hard, the words striking her deeply. She had always believed that she needed to be alone, that she needed to maintain control. But now, with John standing in front of her, something inside her was beginning to unravel. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why are you still here?" John's gaze softened, and he stepped closer. "Because I see you, Zafira. I see the person behind the crown, behind the walls you've built. I see the strength in you, but I also see the pain. I see how much you've had to carry on your own. And I'm here because I want to help carry that burden, if you'll let me." Zafira felt her breath catch in her throat. She wanted to push him away, to shut herself off from the feelings he was awakening in her. But for the first time in years, she found herself wanting something she had denied herself for so long. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let you in." John reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "You don't have to know right now, but you don't have to be afraid of letting someone care about you, Zafira. You're not weak for wanting that." Tears filled Zafira's eyes, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to lean into his touch, something she had never done with anyone. The walls she had spent so long constructing began to crumble, piece by piece, as she realized that she didn't have to be alone anymore. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, she found strength. The weight of her crown, her kingdom, her responsibilities. It was still there, but now it didn't feel as heavy. "I'm scared," Zafira admitted, her voice raw with emotion. "Scared of what happens if I let you in. Scared of what it means for me." John squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You don't have to be afraid, Zafira. I'm not here to take anything from you. I'm here because I care about you, and I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, something inside her shifted. The walls she had built to protect herself no longer felt like a refuge. They felt like a prison. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to let someone in. Zafira closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of John's presence, the reassurance of his words. Maybe, just maybe, she thought, I don't have to carry this alone anymore. As the silence between them grew, the air thick with unspoken words, Zafira realized that this was the turning point. She had spent her whole life guarding her heart, but now she was ready to open it. And with John by her side, maybe she could finally be the person she had always meant to be, not just the princess, but the woman who could be loved and care for someone in return. She took a deep breath, her voice soft but steady. "I'm ready," she whispered. "I'm ready to let you in." And for the first time, she truly believed it. Begging for love. The following days brought a quiet shift in the palace. The walls that Sapphira had built around her heart, walls that had stood firm for so long, began to crumble with each passing moment she spent with John. Slowly but surely, the princess, once so proud, so untouchable, found herself growing closer to him, not just as a ruler, but as a person. John had stayed by her side, never pushing, never demanding, simply offering his presence and his understanding. It was something she had never allowed anyone to give her before. And yet, in his presence, she felt a peace that had eluded her for so long. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the stars began to twinkle above the palace, Sapphira found herself standing at the balcony again, staring out at the vastness of space. The weight of her responsibilities still lingered, but for the first time in a long while, it felt manageable. She wasn't carrying the burden alone. John stood beside her, as always, quietly observing her. For the first time, Sapphira allowed herself to look at him without the armor of her royalty, without the pretense of strength. There was no crown, no throne between them now. There was only her and him. And in that moment, she realized how much she had come to rely on him. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if we had met under different circumstances?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. John looked at her, a small, knowing smile on his lips. "Maybe. But then, I think, maybe this is exactly how it was meant to be. I'm glad we met, Sapphira, no matter how it happened." Her heart swelled with emotion at his words, and before she could stop herself, Sapphira found herself turning to face him fully. "I never wanted this," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to need anyone. I've spent my life believing that strength meant pushing people away, that if I could stand alone, I could never be hurt." John's expression softened, his eyes warm and full of compassion. "You're not weak for needing someone. Strength isn't about being alone. It's about allowing yourself to be loved, and to love in return." Sapphira swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She had always prided herself on being untouchable, on maintaining control, but the truth was, she had been afraid. Afraid that letting someone in would mean losing herself, that caring for someone would make her vulnerable to pain. But now, standing before John, she realized that love didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. "I don't know how to do this," she confessed, her voice raw with emotion. "I don't know how to open my heart, but I don't want to live like this anymore, shutting everyone out, pretending I don't need anyone." John stepped closer to her, his hand reaching out to gently cup her face. "You don't have to be perfect, Sapphira. You don't have to have all the answers. All you have to do is trust that I'm here for you, no matter what." Sapphira closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his words. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to let go of the armor she had carried for so long. "Please don't leave," she whispered, her voice breaking. It was a simple plea, but it carried all the weight of the emotion she had kept buried for so long. "Please stay with me." John's heart skipped a beat as he looked into her eyes. There was no hesitation, no doubt in his voice as he replied, "I'm not going anywhere, Sapphira. I'm here, and I'll always be here. You don't have to ask me to stay. I want to be with you." The princess's breath caught in her throat as the last of her walls came crumbling down. She had feared this moment, feared giving in to the love she had long denied herself. But now, standing before the human who had shown her what it meant to truly be loved, she realized that it was worth it. With tears in her eyes, Sapphira reached up and pulled John into a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of release, of surrender, a kiss that spoke of all the things she had kept hidden for so long. She had spent her entire life protecting herself, building walls to shield her from the world. But in John's arms, she no longer felt the need to protect herself from the love she so desperately craved. As they pulled away, Zafira rested her forehead against his, her heart racing in her chest. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, "but I want to face it with you. I don't want to be alone anymore." John smiled softly, his thumb brushing over her cheek. "You don't have to be, Zafira. Not ever again." And in that moment, the princess finally understood. True strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about having the courage to let someone in, to share your heart, and to trust that love could make you whole. For the first time in her life, Zafira wasn't afraid. She was ready to face the future, not as a ruler of an empire, but as a woman who had found love and was no longer afraid to ask for it. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice filled with conviction. "I'm ready to be loved, and I'm ready to love you." John held her close, and together they stood in the soft glow of the stars, the beginning of a new chapter in their lives unfolding before them. And in that moment, Zafira knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved her for who she was, not for the crown she wore. And that was more than she had ever dreamed of.